What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Fitness Simplified Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Anglem, and today I'm joined by my guest, Zach Chomicki. Zach is someone who grew up overweight and had self-image issues all throughout high school, and this is when he decided to make a change. He had been through different fad diets only to realize that they didn't work the hard way. He decided to go to college for health promotion and wellness to help people do the same thing as he did and reach their own goals physically. He started his online coaching business and competed in his first bodybuilding competition in classic physique in 2018, which made him realize that his passion was truly nutrition and evidence-based practice. This also made him decide to pursue a master's in nutrition and dietetics and work to become a registered dietitian. He is also currently working towards a health coach certification as well. I hope you guys enjoy this podcast. We get into a host of details as far as why a personalized nutrition approach can really benefit someone, why fad diets and yo-yo diets can lead you down a path that you don't want to be going down, and also really why overall your relationship with food can have a huge impact on your success with your goals physically. I hope you guys enjoy this. Sit back, turn your volume up, and enjoy. So as far as when you kind of, let's say you're talking to someone who, you're at the office or something like that, and, you have someone who, right, like a burn boot camp, or like a fit body, right, like something like that. Let's say someone comes up to you, Zach, and you're like, hey, like, as far as I'm starting this new diet, but I've seen your coaching and I really think it's something that I can maybe benefit from, but like, why do I need something personalized when I can get something for a lot cheaper when I can just go on and buy a generic meal plan or something like that? Why would I benefit from a personalized nutrition approach, just in a general perspective?
I would most likely say that when you buy like some kind of cheap plan or some kind of like cheap like I guess template, it makes it seem like it would be a little bit of like super strict, like I need to stick to this. And a lot of times that people are going to think they need to stick on that specific plan. They can't have anything else. Maybe even if it's something like they have like a certain vegetable or certain type of meat that they don't exactly like on that meal plan, they think because it's not on their plan, they're not able to have it. So that's where I think it's important to have that individualized approach and having that conversation with the individual or with the client to figure out what they think that they are able to stick with, what they like doing, what they don't like doing. Because in the long run, if they stick on that or that general kind of cheap plan track, they're going to most likely, like I said, think that's all they can have. They're going to restrict themselves. They might see some progress because their calories are going to be restricted or whatever their goal is that the plan is supposed to work for. But eventually they're going to start having those cravings for the other things, even if it's not something that's like considered, I guess, junk food or the less nutrient dense foods. They're eventually going to have those things just because they've been restricting themselves of it. And then they're going to start getting into that bad relationship with food, thinking, oh, I messed up. This is going to mess me up. I'm going to fall off track. Or I already did fall off track. Then they're just going to continue to eat. And they're not going to know how to fit in those things that they do enjoy. So in the long run, they aren't able to stick to the plan. They go into that yo-yo dieting cycle, as opposed to where if they knew how to like set up their meals for the day where they can have something a little bit bigger, the less nutrient dense foods, to like go out for dinner one night, or maybe they want to swap out this type of meat or this type of vegetable or type of or source of carbohydrate. In the long run, that's why it would be better to have that personalized approach so they can learn how to fit in those foods that they enjoy and to make a lifestyle out of it instead of just a 12-week diet plan or whatever their plan is that they were thinking about purchasing.
Yeah, I think that's very well summarized, man. I think at the end of the day, what you described is when you have that meal plan, or let's say, God forbid, you have like a list of restrictions, right, that you can't eat. It really makes you feel, even as though, like, let's say there's a veggie on there, and if you're not eating that specific veggie, you're not eating according to plan, right? Therefore, you shouldn't be happy, right? You shouldn't be, feeling like you're accomplishing things that you should be doing, or like checking, the boxes that you should be, because you're not eating according to that specific plan. And it's so baffling, because a lot of times that plan could be something they literally found off the internet, some random thing. Like there was this thing the other day that was like, it was like restricting all these different things. It was like no alcohol, no sugar, no carbs, like all these like different things. And then it had like all these certain things that it had, as like what you should be doing for the day. And it was so funny because it was like no carbs, no sugar. Then one of the things that it listed, and this was like an infographic with like, a bikini picture in the background. It literally lists this thing of like what you should be drinking or eating every day. First thing, it's like orange juice, glass of orange juice. I was like, wait, so contradiction number one, like, orange juice is obviously going to have some carbs in it and some sugar, like, you know what I mean? So it was just so funny where I'm like, somebody looks at this, they don't even think about that, it just like goes right over their head. And I think that's where it's like, if you're going to invest in anything, especially if you've struggled for a while, would you not want to learn and I think this is where the gap really is, bridging the gap and be willing, of course, but learning and actually educating yourself, like you were saying. So don't you want to just not blindly follow some plan that you probably can't stick to, but rather learn the process and maybe have some sort of a template that you can work off of. But like you mentioned, plug and play for the events that are going to happen in your life, where you should be able to go enjoy yourself. And I think that's so key, man. And I think really getting someone to understand that is not easy. And I think like even just me putting you on the spot there, having you, answer that question, it's a hard question, because you have that in a 5-minute window or a 2-minute window when somebody asks you that after class or at the grocery store or wherever you may be. And you're like, I can't really articulate everything you need to know right now, in a 2-second window or as fast as you want it. So I think what you said though is so important, because once you say long-term, like, hey, do you actually think this is something you could do for a year or for the rest of your life for that matter? And if you can't say yes, or if you can't say that there's some variation of it, because that's where I like to say, like, obviously, yes, we need to be in a deficit if you're trying to lose weight, but you're not going to be in that deficit forever. But that doesn't mean that you're really changing the foods you're eating or the diet you're on. Like you should never use the word diet in that context. It's more, the diet that you're eating, right? Like not going on or off, because it's like on and off is not a good thing, because that's like, again, black and white thinking. So again, man, I think that was very well articulated. And I want to ask you, so when you start someone out, like let's say someone, you explained exactly what you just did, and I'm like, all right, Zach, like I love it, man, that sounds really good. Where do you start someone off, or someone even listening to this, let's say they were beginning with you as a client and you were starting them off, where does that begin for you as far as, obviously, they need to start quantifying. And I know you've posted about this on Instagram, that there's not necessarily one way of going about it, which I think is so key. And that's where the personalized nature comes in. Where do you start someone out though, who's maybe never tracked before, doesn't even know what you mean when you say tracking? They're kind of just like, oh yeah, probably like measuring of some kind, but like they have no clue of what that means. And they've never really cared before until now. They're willing to learn. Where does that begin for you, man?
So I've been doing a lot of, since I'm working or studying for my health coaching certification, the main thing that they really drive home so far with it is that the main point as the coach is to ask a lot of open-ended questions, figure out the client's strengths and what they think they're able to do or what they've done in the past, and kind of draw upon that. So what I do is I ask a lot of questions, like where they're at, how they rate their nutrition right now, their knowledge of it right now, exactly what their goal is, what it is they really want to achieve, I guess how serious they are about achieving it. And then from there, I kind of take it on a case-by-case basis. The first thing I'll mention is, would you feel comfortable tracking what you eat for about a week, and not even so much tracking calories, just because I just want to get a sense of where they're currently at. So it's more so just like using like MyFitnessPal or some kind of app, and just having them put in the foods they eat when they eat it, just so that way I can take a look at it and see like what trends they currently have, what where their calories are at, where their proteins at, the different macro breakdowns that they might have on average, and then kind of take it from there. If they're a little bit more serious and they have been tracking, then like right away I will come up with a calorie goal, a protein, carbohydrate, fat goal, and break that down to like different meal options during the day and how they could break it down. But for someone who's like just getting into it and has never done this before, it's mainly just trying to get them to become aware of where they're currently at and what we can do moving forward. So like even if they're not comfortable for like tracking 7 days, maybe we can have them do like a 3-day food log and just have them track for 3 days, just writing down what they eat, be as accurate as they can with like amounts, and like times of day, when like snack times, all of that stuff, or even like a 24-hour food recall, just trying to think about what they had in the past 24 hours. With those last two options, it can be a little bit more difficult to make the faster results, just because a lot of time it's not going to be the most accurate. So it's going to take a little bit of like time to figure out where they actually are at, if they overestimated or underestimated things. So it's mainly just trying to get some form of quantifiable information that we can use moving forward.
Totally. I think that's so key. And again, it goes back to the personalized nature of it and really getting down to the bottom of where someone is at the beginning and having some sort of like a questionnaire or some sort of, intake process where you're getting them to understand and find a baseline where you can then adjust, because not everyone might be ready for, a full spectrum macro profile where they need to hit carbs, fats, and proteins to a specific gram. Right. Or like, not everyone might be ready for even an app, right? Like it might throw them off a little bit. I've definitely had clients where they're like, yeah, this is overwhelming me a little bit. And it's like, hey, like you mentioned, let's go to just a food diary where we're writing it down, literally, old fashioned style. And it's like, again, it goes back to your accountability of some sort of measurement and really being aware and mindful about what you're eating and how much you're eating, why you're eating it, the intention behind everything you're doing. I think that's so big. And what you mentioned, it's again, kind of relating to the education, I think, like teaching them like, hey, this is why we're doing this whole tracking thing. Like it sucks. It might not be fun. I always tell my clients, I'm like, I don't enjoy it. I don't enjoy punching things into MyFitnessPal. But what I do enjoy is knowing that I'm going to be precise with what I'm trying to do, because it's going to give me the results that I want. And it's just like the whole, the process of your long-term goals. It's like, yeah, it's daunting a little bit when you think so long-term, but don't think about that. Think about how much better you're going to be feeling along the way, seeing results. And when you really do get to that end goal, which again it should be continuing to move in progression, of course, but it still feels good. You got to be able to look back and enjoy that. So I think that's key, where it's like, hey, this can be probably, the most optimal way to get to where you want to be, but not everyone might be ready for that. And I think that's where it's like, of course, taking into their experience and all that sort of thing, so they're not becoming overwhelmed. And then they want to give up again, because that's, the last thing we want to do when we probably, most people are coming to us who've probably tried, multiple different things already, because that's typically the case when they're like, hey, I've tried everything that doesn't work, and now I'm ready for something that's going to be tailored to what I need. And I think that's a big breakthrough,
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I'm not really a fan of with the fitness industry on like social media, because like you have all these like influencers or bodybuilders that people follow and look up to for information, and they tell them like they need to track their macros and they need to track exactly what they eat. And by seeing that so often on social media, and since those guys are the quote experts, just because they have either been doing it forever or they just have really good genetics. They think the people seeing that who are trying to just get started think that's the only way to do it. And if they can't do that, then they're not going to be successful. And that's going to lead to that learned helplessness that is often seen when trying to reach a fitness goal or lose weight or build muscle, because they're trying what they're seeing these influencers posting so often, and it never works and they always fall back. So I think it's important to, like we were saying, like teach them that that's not the only way to do things, and we can start things slowly. It's going to take a little bit more time, but in the long run, the chances are you're eventually going to be able to build up to that, or you're going to be able to figure out the way that you can do it on your own without doing that.
Exactly. And I think at the end of the day, it's one of those things, like we were mentioning, you know, bridging that gap so someone can understand that it's not going to be just so, you know, black and white of like, you have to just restrict everything. You have to get yourself into a place where you're miserable. And I think that's like the funniest thing, because I've literally had clients where they're getting started, right? And like they might sign up on like a Friday or whatever. And they're like, all right, like, well, I'll have everything, you know, ready by Monday. We'll start a fresh week. And they're like, almost, you can tell they're like apprehensive about like it's like they're like starting some sort of, you know, like, like just like this looming black cloud is over them on Monday, and it's like slowly moving in, right? Like winter is coming, like, and it's like, no, you're gonna be fine, you know, like it's more like this is slow and it's gonna be steady. Maybe you don't get the results that you want right now, but like, who cares? Let's say those results came right now. You lost 50 pounds in 3 months, but you end up right back to where you were the next 3 months. It's like, would you rather have that, or you lose 3 pounds the first month, but you learn more than you ever have in your entire life, and then you use that thereafter for the rest of your life and maintain and continue moving in the right direction. So I think it's hard for us as humans to understand that. And I say this so much to my clients, where it's like, we expect to do one thing and another thing happen. Like literally, like, you know, there's no balance in between that. You know, it's like we expect it to happen now, and that's the day and age we live in. You know, one click for your shopping, you know, one click for groceries, one click for anything, right? And it's like, it's not like that when it comes to your long-term bad habits that have created the results you obviously are not happy with. You know, it's the same way that's going to happen when it comes to the overall good habits that you have to start creating daily to really add up for that long-term goal. But so kind of get into, let's say someone, you know, so they start out and they're like, all right, Zach, you know, I've heard about this whole tracking thing. Like, I'm not going to weigh out my food, man. Like I'll track, but I'm not going to weigh anything out. What do you say about that?
I would say with that case, it's a little bit more difficult with that, just because you're not able to figure out amounts, which is where I would then recommend going in, well, depending on their goals. If they're not looking to like compete or like diet down to super low body fat levels where it almost is necessary to track exactly like that, I would recommend, so like if they just want to like just lose weight or just start like build a little bit of muscle, lean out a little bit, but it's not like a huge deal. They just want to start focusing on eating healthier and working out regularly. I would suggest getting into that mindful and intuitive eating approach where they don't have to track anything at all. They just get into that like being mindful and thinking about food before they eat it, while they're eating it. So that way they are able to make their own decisions, and we could start that way. And eventually, once they get comfortable with that, maybe we could segue into starting to track.
Totally. And I think even with some of my clients where they've said that to me, I'm like, okay, that's fine. You know, totally knowing that, of course, like, and I'm going to explain that to them, like, where just so you know, that's not going to be as accurate right away, but that's fine, because I want to make sure that this is moving in the direction that you want, but just giving them that understanding, right? And also giving them the understanding that, and sometimes you don't even have to articulate it to them really, but just let them do it and say, all right, just track without measuring. And it's like that in itself is going to be basically a food accountability assessment, because they're still tracking things, because they're like, yeah, that sleeve of Oreos that I used to have after dinner, I don't like to do that anymore because I plugged that in, right? And I saw, how many calories it was, right? And they're like, oh, or like one of my clients, literally the other day, he goes, he just started with me this week. And I'm assuring you, he's not, I know for a fact he's not weighing anything out, because he told me he doesn't have a food scale right now. And we haven't even had that discussion, but he literally just said, he goes, yeah, I plugged in my breakfast that I have. And it's funny because a lot of people, when they start out, they're going to be eating out a lot more than they would like to be, right? So it's kind of actually sometimes easy to plug that in MyFitnessPal, whether or not it's, accurate, of course, because it's eating out, but they can plug it in quickly, right? And he's like, my breakfast is almost 1,000 calories, and then the next day he switched it up right away, and he was already aware of things, already making mindful choices. And I was like, dude, that's a huge win. I hope you know that, like keep that in mind, because that's exactly what this is, like the purpose of what we're doing is, you know what I mean? So it's just setting yourself up for success. So I've literally done that, where it's like, hey, well, we can do that, but when we are, not seeing the results that we want, or we need to get a little bit more diligent, at the end of the day, the more variables that we can control and have data on, the better off we can, make adjustments or not, because we don't need to. Or we do because we're not seeing the results that we want accordingly. So, it's like, even with weigh-ins, that's another funny thing. I always have people, because I have my clients, I send them a message every day where it says, it's an automated message, and it's like, hey, like, just make sure you grab a weigh-in this morning, before you eat or drink anything, before you go to the bathroom, or excuse me, after you go to the bathroom, ideally, right? And like, I would love for them to do it every day. And I love for them to be able to do it blindfolded and have it like send it to me, right? Like, so they don't even have to look at it for a lot of them. But I even tell them, I'm like, we should get used to you weighing in more often, because a lot of times it can mess with someone, of course. But I literally tell them, this is the only thing that is black and white, I like to say, because I would rather have you weigh in as much as you can first thing in the morning accurately, or not at all. Because when you start weighing in the once a week thing or the once a month, that's where I think it can actually backfire. And I have a really good chart that illustrates this, where it's basically showing you, okay, if you weigh in every Friday morning, or you weigh in at Friday, whatever, at any random time, because you're not really aware that that matters, you could totally have one weigh in week 1, week 2, you drop down 1.5 pounds. You're like, oh, awesome. That next week you're up 3 pounds. And you're like, oh my gosh, I've been doing great. What's going on? Right. But if you would have actually collected that data from the full 3 weeks and you average that out, you could have been down 1 pound every week and you didn't even know it, because you just didn't get the data. And it's like, once people understand that, they're like, oh, and I'm like, start viewing it as data, not your well-being, right? Or like your self-worth. It's a weight, right? It's just a weight. Especially with me and you, because you're going to be obviously, increasing people's, knowledge and abilities to understand why they're going to want to be doing weight training, right? And actually benefit from there. And then that's a whole can of worms of like, hey, you might be recomping, right? You might be having a recomposition effect where you're actually losing some body fat and building some muscle, and the weigh-ins aren't really changing. So it's like, there's so many different things where people really understanding, again, I keep saying it, but it's like, when they get that education, which comes from that personalized nutrition approach, which, I can tell you're already about that, where you're like, hey, this is the why behind what we're doing. It's more willing to get people bought in, man. So overall, I like that a lot. And so if someone was doing that, how long would you have them go? And obviously it's going to be case by case, but generally, how long would you have them maybe track just from a food diary perspective, or, where they're actually writing it out before they would transition into tracking? And how would you make that transition into MyFitnessPal or an app sort of mindset, man?
Like you said, it'd be a case by case basis. Usually it is, if they're tracking and I have a good idea, depending what their goal is. If they just want to like bring more awareness to just living a healthier lifestyle, then maybe I'll just suggest maybe adding in some more food, like adding in like another little meal or a snack, maybe some fruits, some vegetables, to what they're already doing. Otherwise, if their goal is to like lose weight or build muscle, I'll go maybe like a week or two, just to kind of see, to get that average amount so we can see where we're at. But then I'll bring up, and say something like, all right, so this is where I'm seeing that we're at right now. Your goal is going to require doing this or starting to do this. How do you feel about that? Do you feel comfortable doing that? Um, and just trying to get them to track a little bit more, and I'll give them a calorie range to aim for. I don't want to throw a bunch of like different factors at them to pay attention to, like have this much water, have this much protein, have this much calories. So maybe I'll throw them like a range of calories to hit per day and then go from there. And then once they start getting used to that and doing that regularly and they're not having a problem with it, then go try adding a protein goal into the mix. And then start getting into the fats, carbohydrates, and just take it as comfortable as they're willing to take it, I guess.
Totally. And I think it's like all about that, what are they going to be able to tolerate most effectively, and also where their feedback level is of where they're ready to go. But I really have found that a nice sweet spot for most people is a calorie and protein goal. And I really just describe it to them as typically like, okay, number one, and getting them to understand the concept where it's like, we could literally lose weight eating cookies, fast food, any food, you name it. And any sort of, like bad or junk food or, lacking in nutrient food, especially micronutrient food, we could do that. That's not taking into consideration, of course, our health, right? Or muscle mass, metabolism, anything like that. But that's where I kind of started out, where they're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. That's kind of cool. But then I'm like, all right, now let's apply that 80-20 mindset of our health, right? Good, wholesome, lean proteins, right? Complex carbs, fruits, veggies, of course. But then they're like, all right, I start to understand things. And then they're like, calories seem like the most important, but they're like, why is that protein so important? And then you go into, of course, how it's slower digesting, right? It's going to help us feel more full when we're trying to diet. And I hate using that word, but when we're trying to lose weight, right? Trying to lose fat more specifically. And that's where I get them to transition there, where I'm like, we don't want to just lose weight. We want to lose weight, of course, on the scale, but we want that to be fat that we're losing. And that's where they're like, oh, okay, so that protein helps that. And that's where the resistance training comes in. Oh, I get it, Joe. And so that's where I'm like, yes, exactly. And then also, I mean, the way I see it is like, if they're eating their protein goal and they're hitting their protein goal, they're controlling their calories. A lot of times they're like, where should my carbs and fats be? And I'm like, well, honestly, break it down to whatever is going to be allowing you to feel good, have energy throughout the day, have energy during your workouts, but really whatever's going to keep you adherent to that calorie goal as well. You know what I mean? So I'm like, because if you're eating that much protein, especially compared to what most people are, and even then, my clients who aren't lifting, 7 days a week, they're not at some astronomical, 2 grams of protein per pound of body weight or anything, but it's like they're eating probably more than they were. They're going to be eating healthier because of that, and of course, you can makeshift it with protein bars and protein shakes all day, but that's where the adherence comes in and kind of getting that feedback from them and seeing what they're actually eating. So anyways, I think that's a big thing, man, because it's like, once you see that progression, once they understand that, and I think another big thing is getting them to understand, where I'll literally tell my clients, I've had this happen. I'm like, I'm not going to let you work out at all right now. Like, things are just too overwhelming for you to work out, or we're just going to try to do daily walks. We're going to try to increase our caloric expenditure through minimal ways of going about it, because we need to understand that the bigger pieces of the pie in terms of where you want to be isn't going to be just endlessly working out without taking anything else into consideration. It's going to be more so, let's focus on our sleep, let's focus on our hydration, our calories, and overall nutrition, the quality of what we're eating. I think that's all so important. And then they're like, oh, like, I don't even have to work out as much. I'm like, dude, I would rather have you work out 1 day less, meal prep, focus on your nutrition, get stuff done, like, be less stressed, chill out for a bit, because it's going to be better long-term, man. So I think that's huge. And one thing I want to talk about, and this is something that I get asked about often, let's say someone asks you about intuitive eating. So where would you kind of go with intuitive eating? I kind of like to, talk about intuitive eating like it's kind of where you ultimately want to be, and be able to do effectively, and maintaining the look and the feel and the overall quality of life that you want, while not, having to necessarily track as one would think of tracking. So how do you explain that to someone? How do you explain kind of the mindfulness behind it and that sort of thing, just to get a better understanding of what intuitive eating is, Zach?
So with the intuitive eating, I think a lot of people might think that it is um, like no, automatically knowing how like the nutrient breakdown of the foods that they generally eat, and then just like picking it and being able to like mentally add it up. And I mean, that can partially be into it, but that's not really a big portion of it. It can definitely be helpful, and can be a side benefit of tracking food. So they know how much they're eating, like just generally, and they don't even have to think about it. They can just eat and figure it out like on their own. But for people who, like we've been talking about, aren't really into the whole tracking thing and aren't in the position to um, have those numbers and amounts kind of memorize from doing it for so long. I like it's the main thing is with intuitive eating is being mindful of like how you're feeling, how you want to feel. Are you actually hungry? What's your goal behind eating? So like I like starting off with thinking before they would eat something, ask themselves, am I really hungry? Am I just bored? Am I thirsty? Should I have a glass of water first and then see if I'm still hungry? Um, and if they decide that they are hungry, then we'll take it a step further. Um, what do you want to eat right now? Is it like a craving, like something like they want a double bacon cheeseburger, or would they be satisfied with like some kind of like grilled chicken dish with rice and vegetables or something? And taking it a step further from there, thinking, okay, I'm not thirsty. I'm not bored. I'm actually hungry. How do I want to feel after I'm done eating? If I'm going to be eating that double bacon cheeseburger with a side of large fries, how am I going to feel afterwards? Am I going to feel nauseous? Am I going to feel bloated? Am I going to be tired and sluggish? Do I want to feel like that afterwards? Am I going to regret eating it afterwards? I think that's also a big thing. Thinking about if they're going to regret it or not afterwards as a way to self-monitor what they eat. But if they don't want to feel like that afterwards, maybe they do want to feel like that afterwards and they're not going to regret it. I'm like that sometimes, I'm not going to lie. But I know that that's my decision to make. And if I'm not going to feel negatively about it afterwards, and I'm aware of how I'm physically going to feel afterwards, it's not really a big deal. But say they know they're going to feel bad about it afterwards, and they know they're not physically going to feel the best afterwards, then go with the chicken breast and the rice and the vegetables. And then while they're eating, check in every once in a while, every few bites or so. How am I feeling right now? Am I satisfied? Am I going to be satisfied in a few bites? Is this fulfilling to me? Is this accomplishing what I am wanting to accomplish? And is it aligning with my goals? And just kind of continuing to check in like that. So maybe one time when they check in after a few bites, they're halfway done with their meal, they check in mentally, they think, all right, I'm feeling full. This tastes good. I don't feel bloated right now. I don't feel sick. I haven't eaten until I'm sick, but I'd be fine stopping. Then perfect. Stop right there. You can save the rest for later on in the day, or for a lunch tomorrow, or for dinner tomorrow. It's mainly just going over mentally and thinking about things before you do it and while you're doing it, to kind of gauge on what you want to do.
Totally. And I think that what you mentioned is so big as far as like how you're gonna actually feel afterwards. And something what I've used with a lot of my clients and even myself, where, you know, if you feel yourself, especially with a food that's going to be really highly palatable that you could tend to overeat on, or maybe it's like a trigger food for you if you've experienced maybe binge eating or something like that. But eating the normal amount, the portion size or whatever you're having, the serving size beforehand, and then actually waiting and set, like, before you're like, oh, I need more, waiting 20 minutes or
Mhm.
so, and actually
Yeah.
genuinely seeing, like, do I need more, or do I need to just digest this and actually understand that I am full and I'm just eating for, again, because like you mentioned, boredom, or just desire, just because emotional, whatever, drive or whatever it may be. Because obviously there's many cases, but that's very interesting, and something that I've also used with especially my clients who have experienced binge eating in the past. If they do feel something like this coming on, and I can't remember who I got this from, or where I heard this, but I've heard this used by a few different people. Basically, if you feel that binge coming on, actually have a glass of water and then wait
Mhm.
again, wait that 20 minutes, and if you still feel hungry after that, then eat. And really, it's kind of interesting because they were like, you can only really do so much damage in one day, and it's kind of interesting where it's like, like, seems kind of backwards and sort of the perspective of things, but it's like,
Mhm.
at the end of the day, it's focusing and hoping that that hunger cue and that 20-minute window, all of a sudden gets you playing with your kids, or going and
Mhm.
doing something, going for a walk, or realizing that you're not really needing anything. Like you mentioned, it could just be thirst, or
Mhm.
something else going on. So I think creating that mindfulness with yourself and really knowing that is the biggest thing, I think.
Mhm.
And then again, like you mentioned, it usually comes from practice and time
Mhm.
with tracking at some capacity to then be
Yep.
able to transition and learn. Because I even tell
Mhm.
that to my clients where they're like, they might slip a little bit. They're like, yeah, I haven't been tracking as much as I should be. And I'm like, well, how have you been doing on those days you haven't been tracking? Like, obviously I want you to be, but how's it been going? And they're like, well, actually I've been a lot better. I've been kind of a creature of habit, eating pretty similar things. I'm like, great. Like, that's not a bad thing. That's actually kind of a positive in the scheme of things. But if we're
Mhm.
not seeing the results we want, obviously let's kick it back into gear. Of course, it's only going to help us. But at the end of the day, you're obviously learning a little bit. And I mean,
Mhm.
that's even myself, where, if I feel a little bit slipping, I can't tell you that I track every day. It's more of an intuitive eating approach for me most of the time. But if I slip, if I feel things going in a direction that I don't want, or I need to kind of really kick it into gear, I'm going to get back to tracking. Again,
Mhm.
I don't like it, not fun, but I know it's going to be
Yeah.
the big key way of getting to where I want to be, even with experience and knowing, what I'm doing, a lot about my body,
Mhm.
how things react. But um, yeah, that's a big one for me, as far as if I eat something that I know I'm going to be tired and just like wanting to do nothing after, or not be able to think or focus or do my work. It's a big drive for me to not eat that thing,
Mhm.
whether
Yeah.
whether it's good or not, So I think once
Mhm.
you understand that and also learn how certain foods are going to react to you, um,
Mhm.
I think that really makes a big difference for yourself, because you're like,
Mhm.
oh, why would I want to do that when I'm trying to do X, Y, and Z afterwards,
Mhm.
after I'm done eating here? So, yeah, I
Mhm.
think you see food in a different way, and it's not like
Yeah.
you need to be eating, you need to be, full all the time. Like, it's like, no, 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 you can definitely find a balance sometimes, and
Mhm.
not.
And I know like personally with me, my like favorite food is pizza, but that's also like my I don't want to say enemy, but it's like my kryptonite, I guess. Like in the past, I had a big problem where if I would have a pizza, because I like live by myself and I'd be by myself, like in my mind, I would think I have to eat this whole thing, and I would end up eating the whole thing, even if I ate my around my calorie goal for the day, and then like I would feel like sick afterwards. Even like the next morning I would feel sick afterwards. And it's like now I definitely don't restrict myself with pizza. It's still my favorite food. But like I usually wait for on the days where maybe I have barely eaten at all today and I need to reach my calorie goal. I'll get a pizza, and then when I have the pizza, if I start feeling full like halfway through, then I'll stop eating it. Then I know I have some for tomorrow too, and I'll get to enjoy it then. Um, and I don't really have that problem anymore with like thinking that I have to eat the whole thing just because it's there. Sometimes I do eat the whole thing, but I don't feel bad about it anymore. Um, but it's like I said, I save it for the days where I know I haven't eaten that much throughout the whole rest of the day. That I wait to do that.
Yeah, and I think that's so big where you kind of are viewing it in a different way where you can definitely see the intention behind things where, again, you might be going out to eat with some friends and you're going to have some pizza or, it's a certain occasion. And again, that's the mindfulness behind it. I think that's so big for a lot of my clients where I'm like, the mindfulness comes into play really big when you are dealing with those treats or those, again, those lacking in micronutrient density foods, right? Where it's going to be a little bit easier to overeat on. That is where I think it's so big, picking and choosing those battles so much. I just actually did a podcast with one of my clients he's down 65 pounds from the beginning of August. So he's been killing it. And it's very interesting because he literally talks about, he's like, where I've really kind of gotten that understanding where, I can enjoy myself. I can go have some beers or some pizza or whatever with my buddies. But if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it on my accord. I'm not going to feel pressured or feel like I need to do it just because. It's going to be because I actually want to, and there's intention behind it again. And you're not, at home on a Tuesday night, just like eating and going crazy on things. There's mindfulness behind it, so I think it's just very interesting when you really get into things and it's like, you can always skew it so easily. Well, I'm mindfully, eating this whole pizza. It's like, well, obviously, you got to be realistic with it. But I think, I think her handle is anti-dietitian or anti-diet dietitian. She had a really good illustration. I actually reposted it. It was basically like a kind of like a meter or like a scale of like hunger. And it was like, you never want to be on like, either end of the spectrum too far. And I think that's anything, right? It's like, again, not black and white where you just like, you never want to be just like so full that you feel sick and you keep eating. Of course, that's like, the telltale sign of, overeating and binge eating. But it's like at the end of the day, you also don't want to just be so starved that you end up wanting to binge because you're just so hungry. So it's like you kind of keeping that polar, opposites at bay and kind of staying in that middle ground of like, yep, I'm a little hungry. Let's eat, let's not overeat. And let's kind of get back to where we need to be. So, because I think, you can definitely get to that polar end of the hunger spectrum when you're going on these crash diets or something that's so restrictive and so drawn as far as, or cut rather, as far as calories. And then you're like, yeah, I'm seeing a ton of results. Well, it's like, no wonder. Are you going like a liquid detox, right? Or are you going these cleanses? It's like, you drink water all day too. Yeah, you're going to lose a lot of weight. You know what I mean? Like throw some, just vitamins and minerals in there that you may or may not be absorbing. You're like, who knows what's going to happen? You're just going to be running to the bathroom quite often. So, so yeah, man. So is there anything else you wanted to touch on as far as, with the personalized approach with things or just the different methods of food tracking at all, man?
I don't think so. I think we pretty much had it covered, everything that I was thinking about.
Perfect. Yeah, because I was going to say this has been very, very informative, and I hope a lot of people are benefiting from this because I think, just getting an understanding of nutrition tracking. I think when people hear that, especially if you've done maybe some fad diet before, or you've tried something in the past, like for instance, when someone does keto now, and I was mentioning those Facebook groups before we got on the podcast, there's keto groups out there and there's so many people that will track their carbohydrates and that's it. And I'm like, I get where they're coming from, but to think that you're not tracking your overall calories at all, it's like, it's totally missing the boat of like where you're putting your willpower. And that's where I just that's one of my biggest things with my coaching. It's like, I want my clients to be able to execute, not overthink, and work smarter, not harder. And that's like where it's like, if you're putting the effort into tracking anything, like let's track your calories and let's, maybe add in your protein from there. But it's like, so many of these people will be like, I'm staying under my carb goal for the day, but I'm not losing weight. And I'm like, well, you're probably still eating too many calories. Like, you know what I mean? Like you're eating way too much fat or you got more, well, it's probably going to be that case in a ketogenic sort of diet. But it's like, it's just, again, it's hard to not get frustrated, but again, it's like, they just don't know. And it's like, you have to remember that. And it's like, that's where hopefully this is an enlightenment a bit, where you're like, hey, if you're tracking just carbs, you're missing the boat as far as what really is going to be actually the mover of the needle. So,
and then like, even if they are tracking the carbs, but they're not tracking like protein, they could be eating too much protein and then they're still not going to be in ketosis.
Oh, dude, honestly, I would tell you, I would literally love to do some sort of a study, but there's no way of doing it. I would say that 90% of the people who do keto are never in ketosis. I would literally bet my life on it. It's like they're losing weight because they're in a deficit. If they're losing weight, they're cutting a whole food group out. Of course, if you cut out a whole macro group, if I cut out all my fat, well, that's going to be even worse because I'm going to feel horrible. But nonetheless, just like you would if you were working out all the time and you start doing keto, I don't care what you say. If you had some sort of carbs, even minimally, you're going to benefit from a workout standpoint. I just, I just can't see any other way around it,
Yep. And like I've seen people where they say they've been doing keto for like a year, but then they say like on the weekends they'll have regular food, and then like I have to explain, then you're not doing ketosis and you haven't been in ketosis. You're basically just like
eating a low carb diet. Yeah, you're literally on a low carb diet with some refeeds on the weekend. Yeah, exactly. It's like, so, and then you literally can, I love that when I think you said it earlier, where you're like strategically asking people questions. I think that's the best way to get someone to understand their own like logic or lack of logic, where they're like, so you're telling me you're in ketosis, but why do you eat normal on the weekends? Well, I miss the foods that I love. Oh, okay. So you eat more on the weekends than you do during the week. Yeah. Okay. So, where's the disconnect there of why don't you think you could eat those foods during the week as well and maybe just balance things out a little bit? And then they're usually like, they're starting to come around. They're like, well, and it's like literally like, and then they're just kind of, and that's where I'm like, oh, you can kind of see the breakthrough now where it's like, you could do that, but just understand that you're not on keto and that you're probably just perpetuating some person to do the, some, again, coworker diet, right? And they're like, oh yeah, I'll just try this too. Like, and it seems to work for her. And it's like, oh, that's just a recipe for disaster because there's just so much context to it. But yeah, it's so interesting because then you really have to kind of explain it through questions where you're like, hey, this is kind of what you're doing right now, and I hope you realize it. I'm just trying to help you out. So because it's hard. Even then, even if you're nice about it, some people get offended and they're like, whatever. And it's like, okay, I'm just trying to let you be able to drink a beer, right? Or like have some fruit and not be like, I'm at my carb goal for the day, darn it, like, so it's just interesting. Of course, unless, like you're in like certain cases where it's like an epileptic, sort of case where somebody has epilepsy. I know the keto diet can be very beneficial for that, but they're probably supervised by a doctor. I guarantee they're supervised by a doctor and they're actually in ketosis because otherwise it's not going to work for them. So anyways, but yeah, that's where the total spin on that came from. Oh yeah, like this works for this case, like let's just use it in fat loss terms. So typical fitness industry winning again, so but yeah, man. So anyways, I think this is a great episode. I think this is going to be very, very insightful for a lot of people. So thank you for everyone who's still listening. And otherwise, thank you guys, especially if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe, like the video. My comments, for some reason, Zach, have been disabled on YouTube, which is really awesome. I have no idea why, but it's been like that for a while. So if you have any questions for me or Zach, you can definitely hit us up on Instagram, or you can hit me up on Facebook. I actually have like my Snapchat in there too, a whole bunch of different ways to contact me, my email. So I'll put that information as well, how to contact Zach if you have any questions for him, or you'd be interested in getting in contact with him for coaching, or you want more information on things. I'll put that below his website and everything like that. So thank you again, Zach. And thanks for everyone as well for listening. And we'll catch you guys in the next episode.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me too.
No worries at all, man. Have a good one, guys. And we'll talk to you guys in the next episode. Take it easy.